Great. Well, the idea of the second session is to take some of the content and some of the many questions and unanswered questions from the first session and work together to build them into something actionable. And I know that so many of you in the room here are leaders in, whether it's in academia and research, in practice, in industry, making this happen. So that's why we've asked you to join us in this endeavor. And we're really relying on this session sort of starting a conversation with many of you that we hope will go on and continue to deepen this work that we're doing. And we also hope that this session will be very valuable to you all as well. We certainly don't expect to come away with something fully finished, and there's going to be more questions than we started with, I'm sure. And that's precisely why we're doing this. So this is a work that we are doing. I mentioned in the first session that we've been working with folks at Grimshaw Architects and Trilux and Paul and Jeff on the Sustainable Wood Specifications Working Group. And we've also been working, our team as part of the founding group of Cities for Forest, along with the World Resources Institute. And that's converged in a work that we're calling Sustainable Wood for Cities. And it's really about giving cities tools to specify, first to understand and then specify and demand sustainable wood in the work that the cities are doing directly and indirectly. So I guess one of the first questions that you could ask to that is, well, what is sustainable wood? What does that look like? This is a smattering of wood samples of hundreds around our shop. And really the answer is it can be, potentially it could look like all of these things. And where oops, I'm going to jump a slide here. Where does sustainable wood come from? And these are photographs from some of our partners, some from Peter Pinchot's work there. You can see some from Dave Barman's urban wood salvage operations in Portland, Oregon. Wood coming from heavily intensively managed forests. And so the range is huge. So I'm going to go back to this slide. This is a sketch that precipitated the panel conversation from a number of weeks ago, where we were just trying to get our heads around the basic idea of the sort of flow coming out of the forest, how much wood comes out, how much is lost to decomposition, how much carbon stays in the forest, what can be repurposed as biofuel. These are all questions that the panelists were speaking to, and each one of these streams and threads has its own kind of ecology. And getting to a point where we can call wood sustainable means grappling with all of these things, as well as where that wood ends up, how long it stays and in its place, and how it gets reused perpetually. And also looking at the question of what happens to the forest as you apply different harvest cycles, intensity of management, et cetera, versus what if you just left that forest alone. Coming to the demand side very quickly, where can wood be used? This is a famous diagram from Stuart Brand's book, How Buildings Learn. It's a wonderful diagram because it speaks to buildings as dynamic systems, where there's not just a building. There's a building that's made up of layers that move at different speeds. They get disposed of at different speeds. And to understand the way we think about sustainability in a building, we have to think about the speed of these different layers, from the stuff that often tends to move through very rapid cycles to structures that might last for many, many hundreds of years in some cases. And where, how and where we specify wood in city environments, from everything from a bicycle to buildings that last for a long time, to bridges, decking, benches, even boats perhaps. And Peter, who was it, Peter, that showed the boat production? Boats can last for a very long time too. So cities can demand and all of these kinds of products and really become partners in sourcing of sustainable wood. I mentioned the working group just quickly to shout out again to Aaron, Alexander, Ellis, Augustin, Liz Zink, Paul Fugue, and Jeff Spiritos. Thank you for your work with us and your continued work on this topic. So we've started developing a guide for cities called the Sustainable Wood for Cities Guide. And we're going to be testing that prototype today. We're going to ask for a lot of grace from everyone to, recognize this is a prototype in development, and really it's about a conversation that can help to focus us on what this tool may be able to do. The idea is that it will provide cities with guidance, expert guidance on reducing their impact, improving their climate profile, and generally promoting sustainable wood in sourcing and procurement for cities. Quickly, a couple of other projects we're doing that are very parallel to this through Cities for Forests. We're working on a forest footprint for cities. This is a tool that is going to help cities, and we've been piloting with several cities so far, to understand their footprint on tropical forests around the world. And this speaks to, I think, many of the panel presentations in terms of impact generally, but this is going to the broad range of commodities that come from city consumption and end up causing deforestation in tropical forests. Primarily, this is agricultural products, but wood is certainly a piece of this. And this is taking available data from FAO and elsewhere and processing it so that cities can understand that. And this is really part of cities moving into the space, becoming more educated, and integrating these kinds of themes into their climate action planning, which is more and more common among cities around the world. Another related endeavor through Cities for Forests is our Partner Forest program. And this is going specifically to building relationships between cities and source forests, community managed forests in particular, that are doing a great job of forest management, like the work that Peter was showing us. There's hundreds, even thousands of forest enterprises around the world that have invested in sustainable production of different products. So we're looking at the whole range of products and services that forests may be able to provide to a city, so that a city can then engage with that partner forest through economic support and other kinds of benefits to the partnership, and essentially help that enterprise do what they're doing better. And I think this fits specifically into how do we build up the relationship between demand and supply so that more producers are doing a better job. So back to our guide that we're producing. This is a framework to help the leaders define sustainability on their own terms. So we really want city actors to be able to say, this is what sustainability means for us. This is what we're trying to do in the city. And then how can wood and sourcing wood become a partner in that endeavor? And also supporting, it's not just about climate, it's about biodiversity goals, health, economic sustainability, et cetera. So we're going to talk about 8 pathways that we've defined to start this conversation for sustainable wood sourcing that we're going to show you, we believe, can be combined into creating a holistic strategy for sourcing wood for a particular project and eventually into long-term policy for a city. In that, there's a voluntary and very much experimental evaluation system that can help cities sort of prioritize and track the benefits and try to push further into the environmental benefits of sustainable sourcing. And that's one of the things we're going to want your feedback on. And ultimately, it's a process. It's basically trying to equip cities to building the capacity so that they're asking the right questions. They're becoming more and more knowledgeable. This isn't about giving a simple checklist and saying, if you've checked these boxes, you get an 8 out of 10. It's really ultimately that the city can do this themselves. The sort of 3-legged stool of sustainable wood that we're basing this on is that there's 3 main areas of concern here with respect to climate in particular. So number 1 is the forest impacts. It was covered very well this morning, that sourcing wood is going to have an impact on a forest, and that impact could range from being very negative to very positive. And we have to understand that every time we source wood, there is going to be a forest impact. And that is going to have a direct climate impact as well, in addition to biodiversity and water and other benefits from forests. There's the storage itself in the product. So how much carbon is stored in a wood product? How long does that last? And how is that maximized and even calculated? And the third one is the kind of comparison of product use. In other words, we've talked a lot about this. If you're building a building out of concrete or steel versus wood, how do we accurately compare that? And there's a lot of work that's being done on that sort of LCA comparison right now. So the structure of the guide that we're going to share with you all, I'll just say, hopefully you've all received the PDF guide in an email. It's also available on the Wood at Work event page. If you click through, if you don't have it at hand, and you go to the Wood at Work event page, you'll see a link that will take you to this resource in a Google file. So we want everyone to have this PDF in hand. It starts with a 2-page overview. There's some basic instructions on how to use it in the handbook. There's a 1-page overview for each of the 8 pathways. And then there's the intention is to build this framework together based on these instructions to create a strategy for sourcing wood on a case-by-case basis, a project basis. Behind all of this, there's a much longer research report that is in progress. We have actually shared the draft of that in those files as well. And we invite anyone who's really interested to take a look at that, but just know that it's absolutely a draft at this point. So in terms of the handbook, this is what you're going to see for each of the sustainable wood sourcing pathways. They're numbered 1 through 8, and I'll go through them briefly one by one, but they're each a page. They each describe what it is, examples of it in use, the benefits in terms of sustainability. How can a city act on this pathway? What are the challenges? And a sort of very high level evaluation concept, sort of a level 1, 2, and 3 via that pathway. Here you can see certification and social forestry up here, and we'll get into those in a minute. Then we have policy options and implications. How could a city start to take that pathway and create a policy around that? And then synergies, which is really important, that we don't see these in isolation at all. We see these very much as working together to build a holistic strategy. The detailed pathways report, this is the sort of larger report. I won't get into this now, but again, if someone is really curious and want to dig in, we would love all of these PDFs can accept comments. And one of the outcomes of this session is that we do get comments from everyone. And we don't want anyone leaving this without providing some kind of a feedback, and there's a few mechanisms to do that. So the strategy concept is that each of these pathways has, in a way, their own sort of ecosystem of benefits, and yet they can work together. So this is where the matrix concept comes in. We're calling them pathways a little bit tentatively. We're struggling with the vocabulary a little bit. The pathways being the places to start. So if we start with certification as a sourcing strategy, we're saying, okay, what if we use certified wood and chain of custody? What if we work with that one? Then does that connect with some of these other strategic pathways? So can we combine certification with species and grade selection? Can we combine it with strategic geography? So let me just quickly go through the 8 pathways here. Certification, chain of custody, social forestry, species and grade selection, strategic geography, local and urban wood, and that's been touched on a fair bit as well. Wood reuse, that's both using reused wood and also designing for reuse. Production efficiency or manufacturing efficiency, that's how well we're doing with getting wood from the forest into the product. And that starts with everything from how you're extracting the wood right through to the finger jointing hardware that you have to maximize every last piece of wood and reduce waste. And then the last is net carbon accounting. And that's equipping people from the consumer through the supply chain to be able to accurately assess how much carbon is involved. And then that's basically inputs and outputs all the way through. So these are the 8 pathways we've defined. And what we want each project to do, and you're going to be put into breakout rooms momentarily, and you're going to be given a starting pathway. So it may be social forestry, for example. You're going to be given a city, and you're going to be given a hypothetical project. And what we're going to ask you to do is to use these documents, the best of your ability, to build a strategy that involves multiple pathways in a sourcing strategy. Now you can see at the top of the screen here, this one says local emphasis. So this would be sort of a way of saying, okay, well, we're going to focus on local wood for this project. But at the same time, perhaps there's a certification element we can claim. Well, we may go and get to a number 3 on local wood. We might get just to a 1 on chain of custody certification and a 1 on species and grade. So it sort of builds up the sort of robustness and resilience of the strategy. And you can imagine almost an infinite number of strategies for sourcing on a given project. And these are all hypothetical, but this is the sort of way these might actually look through the projects you're going to embark on. What it will actually look like for you is we don't have those nice circles. It's just you're going to be essentially putting in a number to each of these and creating notes on each of them, like how, in what way is certification engaged, etc. And really, this is where your free-form notes for us, suggestions, questions, etc., are going to help to build this out. There's also this is the form. There's a Google document for each of the breakout groups. And it'll be a document shared by the 5-6 people that will be in your breakout room. And as you can see, there's a city up here in the corner. There's the project itself. Look, if you want to change the project a little bit, that's totally fine. We're not really, the specificity of the project is really for you just to kind of get started on something. And then there's a starting pathway. We're suggesting in this case that you start with strategic geography. And you're going to be able to answer what that is when you look at the one-pager that supports the strategic geography pathway. But we absolutely want you to go and start mixing and matching with other pathways to build your comprehensive strategy. As much as you can fill in on the sheet is great. You don't have to use these little tables. They're there. You can fill in on the table, but you can also just put notes. Each breakout room has a facilitator. The facilitators are they're no different than you. They don't know any more about this necessarily than you. A few of us are facilitators, but some are just participants, and their role is to just try to keep the conversation moving forward and perhaps take the lion's share of the notes taking. But we're expecting and hoping that everyone will use their computer access to the Google Doc to write notes and comments. And that is it for the presentation.